Dr. Emily Brooks tapped her stylus against the holopad, creating an annoying rhythm that made the Drachnid representative's antenna twitch. She didn't care. After 6 hours of listening to various alien species drone on about quantum mechanics and void space calculations, her third cup of contraband Earth coffee was wearing off, and her patience had evaporated somewhere around hour 2. The Galactic Council chamber, with its soaring crystal spires and floating platforms, was designed to impress. Today, it just gave her a headache. The artificial gravity was always set slightly too high for human comfort, probably another subtle reminder of humanity's primitive status. And furthermore, the Vrenthai ambassador Coral continued, his crystalline form refracting light, in what Emily had come to recognize as a pattern of superiority. The human tendency toward emotional outbursts makes them particularly unsuitable for advanced quantum engineering principles. Their very brain chemistry is compromised by irregular hormone fluctuations. Emily couldn't help but notice how Coral's crystalline body vibrated at a frequency designed to make other council members uncomfortable if they disagreed. Typical Vrenthai passive-aggressive behavior. She'd written 3 papers on it. Ambassador, Emily interrupted, triggering a cascade of disapproving harmonic resonances from the Vrenthai delegation. I've reviewed the data from the Mars colony incident. The emotional outburst you're referring to was a human engineer who noticed a pattern anomaly in the quantum grid because, and I quote from the technical report, it felt wrong. She pulled up the relevant data with a flick of her wrist, the holoscreen expanding to show the incident in question. That engineer's intuition prevented a cascade failure that your own safety systems missed. Sometimes a gut feeling is worth more than 1,000 algorithms. The chamber erupted in the multilingual equivalent of uncomfortable murmuring. The Vrenthai didn't just pride themselves on their technological superiority. They had built their entire civilization around the concept of pure logic and mathematical precision. Their crystalline bodies were as much a product of carefully guided evolution as they were natural development. Coral's form shifted from its usual transparent blue to a slightly darker shade, the Vrenthai equivalent of an condescending smile. Dr. Brooks, your species still sleeps away 1/3 of your lives and experiences emotional attachments to non-sentient organic matter. My own offspring are already calculating 11-dimensional spacetime equations by the age you humans are still learning basic mathematical principles. Emily bit back a sharper retort, instead smoothing her expression into what her colleague called her professional troublemaker smile. And yet, Ambassador, we managed to achieve faster-than-light travel while still enjoying pizza and movie nights. Speaking of which, I'm late for both. She stood, gathering her materials with deliberate slowness. The council chamber's AI adjusted her platform's height automatically, a courtesy that somehow managed to feel insulting. I'll submit humanity's formal response to the technology-sharing rejection through the proper channels. Though I do wonder. She paused, knowing the Vrenthai's pathological need to know everything wouldn't let them ignore the hanging statement. Wonder what, Dr. Brooks? Coral asked, right on cue. I wonder if a species that's engineered out their capacity for intuitive leaps can really claim to be evolving forward rather than sideways. She shrugged, a deliberately human gesture that she knew made the logic-obsessed Vrenthai uncomfortable, just a primitive human thought. As she walked out of the chamber, her heels clicking against the crystal floor in a satisfyingly disruptive rhythm, Emily didn't notice the slight shimmer in the air, like heat waves on a summer day. She didn't see the way the space between spaces rippled, or how, for just a moment, the quantum barriers between dimensions grew thin enough for something to slip through. Somewhere in the Vrenthai capital city, a child looked up from their equations and heard the first notes of an impossible song. The universe held its breath. The first report came from a quantum engineering creche on Crystallis Prime's northern continent. A simple alert. Student Logic Path 9872 has ceased molecular cohesion. The AI supervisor marked it as a routine phase shift. Young Vrenthai occasionally destabilized during intense computational exercises. Then came the second alert. The third. The 100th. Within 6 minutes, Every juvenile Vrenthai in the facility had vanished, leaving behind only faint crystalline dust that sparkled under the facility's harsh lights. Their final quantum signatures showed something impossible. Every child had smiled before disappearing. Ambassador Coral received the news during his post-council meditation cycle. His perfect crystalline form fractured slightly at the edges, a loss of control that would have mortified him any other day. Today, he barely noticed. The reports kept coming, cascading through his neural interface like a tsunami of horror. Regional Education Hub 7, 100% juvenile population loss. Quantum Consciousness Development Center, all subjects untraceable. Warning: mass disappearance event in progress. The Vrenthai prided themselves on their response protocols. They had contingencies for solar flares, dimensional rifts, even reality failures. But they had no protocol for this: the simultaneous disappearance of an entire generation. Analysis, Coral demanded, his voice creating dissonant harmonics that shattered 3 nearby data crystals. I want quantum tracking, temporal traces, dimensional variance readings. Find them. But the technology that had made the Vrenthai the most advanced species in known space provided no answers. The children had simply ceased to exist in their dimension, leaving behind only scattered recordings of their final moments. The security footage played on endless loops across emergency command centers. Children looking up from their studies, their crystalline forms vibrating in an unfamiliar frequency, their usual geometric patterns dissolving into curved organic shapes, a transformation that should have been physically impossible for their species. And the singing. Every recording captured fragments of it, a melody that defied mathematical analysis. The Vrenthai's most advanced audio processing systems couldn't replicate or even properly record it. It existed in frequencies that shouldn't have been possible, following patterns that violated every known law of acoustics. The most disturbing footage came from the Central Youth Development Spire. A young Vrenthai, only 3 cycles into their education, turned to the security sensor and spoke their last words. The numbers are wrong. The song makes them beautiful. Within hours, Crystallos Prime transformed from the galaxy's supreme center of technological achievement into a monument to helplessness. The streets, usually alive with the harmonic hum of millions of Vrenthai going about their perfectly ordered lives, fell silent. Parents stood in empty learning pods, touching the seats where their children had been, their crystalline forms clouded with an emotion they had engineered out of their society generations ago. Fear. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, but the Vrenthai representatives were already fracturing, literally. Their species' legendary control was crumbling in the face of this impossible crisis. Some developed irregular growth patterns, their usual geometric perfection distorting with each new report of loss. Others began emanating chaotic energy signatures, their quantum matrices destabilized by what the medical AIs hesitantly labeled as emotional distress. In her apartment back on Earth, Dr. Emily Brooks woke to an urgent message from the Council. As she read the report, her coffee went cold, forgotten. The Vrenthai, masters of the universe, shapers of reality itself, were experiencing something they hadn't faced in millennia. Complete and utter helplessness. But it was the last line of the report that made her blood run cold. The handful of human children living on Vrenthai worlds as part of cultural exchange programs hadn't disappeared. Instead, they'd all woken up at exactly the same moment, humming a tune their parents couldn't quite hear, drawing patterns that hurt to look at, and asking one question over and over. Why won't the crystal children play with us anymore? Something had changed in the universe. The spaces between spaces had grown hungry, and they had developed a taste for logic. Dr. Emily Brooks stood before the Galactic Council, clutching her great-grandmother's leather-bound journal with sweaty hands. The chamber, usually a model of ordered debate, had devolved into chaos. Species that normally communicated through carefully modulated light patterns were practically strobing with anxiety. The usually stoic Drachnid representatives had molted 3 times in the past hour, a sure sign of extreme stress. But it was the Vrenthai section that drew all eyes. Their crystalline forms had lost their geometric perfection, edges rough and faces asymmetrical. Ambassador Coral, once the epitome of composed superiority, now resembled a piece of cracked glass, held together by sheer will. Distinguished members of the council, Emily began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. We've spent the last 48 hours approaching this crisis from every scientific angle possible. We've deployed quantum scanners, dimensional probes, and reality anchors. But we're asking the wrong questions. Coral's form shuddered. Dr. Brooks, if you're here to waste our time with more of humanity's gut feelings. I'm here because every human child under the age of 12 woke up screaming last night. Emily cut him off. They all drew the same symbol. They all hummed the same impossible song. And when I saw those drawings, she opened the journal, her hands trembling as she turned to a page marked with a faded ribbon. The holographic display activated, projecting her great-grandmother's careful sketches into the air. Beside them, she pulled up the children's drawings from Earth. The patterns were identical, curved lines that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them, spirals that made the mind itch. This journal was written in 1932, Emily continued. My great-grandmother interviewed families across rural America about children who disappeared. Children who, according to witnesses, followed music no adult could hear. Children who drew patterns just like these before they vanished. The chamber erupted in overlapping languages. Emily raised her voice over the cacophony. Humanity has been dealing with children disappearing into other realms for as long as we've told stories. The Pied Piper of Hamelin, changelings, the fair folk. We wrote them off as fairy tales. But what if they were warnings? You expect us to believe ancient human superstitions. Coral's voice crackled with harmonic distortion. While our children err. While your children are being taken by something that lives in the spaces we can't see. Emily slammed the journal shut. Yes, that's exactly what I expect you to believe. Because right now, your advanced technology can't even tell you if your children are alive. But every human child on Earth knows they are. They can feel them. She gestured to another display, showing brain scans of human children during their synchronized dreams. Your children were taken because they were perfect, perfectly logical, perfectly ordered, perfect prey for something that feeds on patterns and predictability. The chamber went silent as Emily pulled up one final image, a crude crayon drawing by a 6-year-old human girl in Singapore. It showed crystalline figures trapped in geometric patterns, while shadowy shapes danced around them. Human children are chaotic, emotional, and unpredictable, Emily said softly. That's why they can see the predators. That's why they weren't taken. They don't make good food. Ambassador Coral's form had stilled completely. How? His voice was barely a whisper. How do we proceed? Emily took a deep breath. We need to put together a team. Not scientists or quantum engineers. We need dream researchers, folklore experts, and parents. We need people who remember what it's like to check under the bed for monsters and leave lights on to keep the darkness away. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes, optical sensors, and sensory organs of each species present. Most importantly, we need to listen to our children. Because right now, they're the only ones who can hear the song that took yours. The Galactic Council, the most powerful gathering of intellects in known space, fell silent. For the first time in its history, it would have to consider the possibility that progress hadn't made them stronger. It had made them vulnerable to something older than civilization itself. Something that sang in the darkness between dimensions and had developed a taste for perfect, logical, crystalline minds. Kelly Martinez hadn't slept in 3 days, which was ironic for Earth's leading expert in lucid dreaming. Her lab at the Stanford Sleep Research Center had been transformed into something between a kindergarten classroom and a military command center. Children's drawings covered every surface, their impossible geometries making the adult researchers' eyes water. Holographic displays showed brain wave patterns that shouldn't exist, and in the corner, A quantum scanner on loan from the Frenthai blinked in perpetual confusion. "They're moving again," she muttered, watching as another cluster of EEG readings spiked in perfect synchronization. 20 children, spread across 3 continents, all entering REM sleep at exactly the same moment. Dr. Brooks leaned over her shoulder, coffee cup permanently attached to her hand. Same pattern as before. Almost. Kelly pointed to a new formation in the brainwave patterns. "See this? They're learning to do it consciously now. The kids are coordinating." On the other side of the lab's observation window, a dozen children sat in a circle, holding hands. They looked like they were playing a game, but their closed eyes and steady breathing told a different story. They were hunting. A Vrenthai scientist, Kelly still couldn't pronounce his name, hovered nearby, his crystalline form vibrating with barely contained distress. His own child had been among the taken, and he'd broken several of his species' protocols just to be here, working with primitive humans. "How can they?" he began, his harmonics crackling with confusion. "The quantum entanglement patterns are completely chaotic. There's no logic to their search method." "That's exactly why it's working," Emily replied, pulling up footage from last night's session. "Look at this." The recording showed 6-year-old Amy Chen during a controlled dream state. As she slept, she spoke in a mixture of English, Mandarin, and something that made the quantum sensors short out. But it was her hands that drew everyone's attention. They moved through the air, tracing patterns that the Vrenthai's most advanced mathematics couldn't map. "She found 63 of your children in that session," Kelly said softly. "She couldn't tell us where they are, but she could tell us what they're feeling. They're scared, but they're alive." The Vrenthai scientist's form shuddered. "How can human children perceive what our best sensors cannot?" "Because children don't know what's impossible," Emily explained. "They haven't learned to filter reality through logic yet. They still see the monsters under the bed, the shadows that move wrong, the spaces between spaces where—" She was interrupted by a sudden commotion from the observation room. Amy had sat bolt upright, her eyes still closed, speaking in that impossible language. The other children followed suit, their voices harmonizing in a way that made the air itself seem to ripple. Kelly's instruments went wild. They'd found something. Something big. Through the glass, they watched as Amy raised her hand, pointing at nothing. No, pointing at something they couldn't see. The Vrenthai scientist's crystalline form began to resonate at the same frequency as the children's voices. "That's—" his voice cracked with static. "That's the frequency my child used to emit when solving complex equations." Emily rushed to the observation room, Kelly right behind her. As they entered, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Amy turned her head toward them, eyes still closed, and spoke in perfect, accented English. "The crystal children are counting. They have to keep counting or the shadows get hungry. But some of them are learning to count wrong on purpose. They're learning to play." The Vrenthai scientist pressed against the glass. "Learning to play?" "Yes," Amy said, a small smile forming. "The shadows don't like play. It tastes wrong to them. The crystal children who learn to play can hide better. We're teaching them, but we have to be careful. The shadows are very old, and very smart, and very hungry." Kelly checked her readings again. The dream network is expanding. More kids are joining in. They're creating some kind of shared dream space. Emily watched as the children began to sway in unison, their joined hands forming patterns that hurt to look at. They're not just finding the taken children, she realized. They're building them a bridge home. The hunt had become a rescue mission, led by the only beings in the galaxy who still believed in impossible things. Marine Sergeant Jack Thompson had faced down alien pirates in the Carina Nebula and survived first contact skirmishes on 3 different worlds. None of that prepared him for watching his 8-year-old twins, Sarah and Michael, voluntarily walk into what the Vrenthai called a dimensional anomaly, but what his kids simply called the place where the lights bend wrong. "Remember," Dr. Brooks said, adjusting the neural monitors attached to the twins' temples. "You're our anchors. The other children can find them, but you two can actually reach them." The twins nodded with the solemn seriousness only 8-year-olds could muster. They were dressed in their favorite pajamas. Sarah's covered in dinosaurs, Michael's with spaceships, because as Sarah had explained, dreamwalking is better in PJs. The lab around them hummed with enough advanced technology to buy a small planet. Vrenthai quantum matrices lined the walls, their crystalline surfaces trying desperately to map spaces that shouldn't exist. The children had arranged their sleeping bags in a perfect circle, surrounded by stuffed animals that they insisted would keep the hungry things away. "Daddy," Sarah said, tugging at Jack's sleeve, "you have to promise not to be too scared when we go away. Fear makes the spaces sticky." Jack swallowed hard. "I promise, Princess. Just come back to me, okay?" Michael grabbed his sister's hand. "We always come back, Dad. The Crystal kids don't know how, but we'll teach them." Kelly Martinez monitored their brain patterns from a nearby console. They're already syncing up with the dreamers in Tokyo and London. Whatever this shared dream space is, it's getting stronger. The Vrenthai scientist, who had finally told them to call them Soul after his crystalline form started developing irregular patterns from stress, monitored his own arrays of instruments. The quantum barriers are thinning. They're doing something our greatest minds thought impossible. They're making reality flexible. Jack watched as his children lay down, still holding hands. Around the world, dozens of other children were doing the same thing. The youngest dreamwalkers, as they'd started calling themselves. The twins' breathing synchronized, and the air in the lab grew heavy. Jack could have sworn he heard singing, but every time he tried to focus on the melody, it slipped away. "They're in," Kelly announced, her voice tight with concentration. Brain patterns showing full immersion in the shared dream state. And something else. Something new. Through the neural link, they could hear snippets of what the twins were experiencing. "The Crystal kids are all in boxes made of numbers," Sarah's voice echoed. "The hungry things like them, neat and organized." "Some boxes are breaking," Michael added. "The kids who learn to play are teaching others. The hungry things don't notice right away because they don't understand games." Saul's form vibrated intensely. They're describing the fundamental structure of quantum spacetime, but as a playground. "How are they?" "Shay," Emily interrupted. "Listen, there's a big one coming." Sarah's voice wavered. "It feels the wrong numbers. It's angry." Jack stepped forward instinctively, but Kelly held up a hand. "Don't break their concentration. This is what we've been waiting for. First contact with whatever took the children." Through the neural link, they heard a sound that made their teeth ache and their eyes water. It was the sound of pure mathematics trying to devour pure imagination, and failing. "You can't eat us," they heard Michael say with all the confidence of a child explaining rules to a newcomer. "We don't make sense, and we're teaching the Crystal kids how to not make sense too." The twins' bodies tensed, their hands clasping tighter. Around the lab, equipment sparked and failed as reality itself seemed to hiccup. "The boxes are breaking." Sarah's voice came through stronger. "Run, run, run. Follow the silly songs." Saul's instruments exploded in a shower of crystalline shards as space itself seemed to bend. For just a moment, everyone in the lab saw what the children could see. Vast geometric shapes hungry for order, pursuing fleeing forms that sparkled like living crystal, their perfect patterns dissolving into beautiful chaos. And leading them through the mathematical maze of dimensions were 2 human children in dinosaur and spaceship pajamas, teaching an entire species how to play hide and seek with reality itself. The rescue hadn't just begun. It had turned into a revolution of imagination against the tyranny of perfect order. Barbara Nana Wilson stood in the Galactic Council's emergency chamber, her gray hair in its usual messy bun, wearing a cardigan covered in paint stains and glitter, the uniform of 40 years in early childhood education. Around her neck hung what she called her teacher's toolkit, a plastic whistle, a small bell, and a handmade friendship bracelet given to her by Sarah Thompson. The most powerful beings in the galaxy stared at her in disbelief as she emptied her tote bag onto the quantum-enhanced conference table. Crayons, coloring books, bubble soap, and a well-loved stuffed elephant named Mr. Trunks. With all due respect, Dr. Brooks, Ambassador Coral's fractured voice created discordant harmonics. How will these toys assist in the rescue operation? Emily, dark circles under her eyes from endless nights of coordination, smiled. Ambassador, you've seen the data. The entities holding your children feed on order and logic. Thanks to the Thompson twins, we know they can't process creativity and play. Nana Wilson here has 40 years of experience weaponizing exactly that. I prefer nurturing chaos, Nana corrected, arranging her supplies with the precision of a general plotting battle strategies. Every child knows monsters hate bubbles and can't cross lines drawn in special crayon. We just never thought to ask why. The assembled alien diplomats watched in confusion as she began drawing elaborate patterns on sheets of paper. To their sensors, the drawings registered as quantum disturbances. The kids figured it out, she continued, not looking up from her work. These beings, these hungry things as the children call them, are like the playground bully who can't handle losing. They only understand one way of playing, their way. But children. She looked up, her eyes twinkling. Children rewrite the rules every 5 minutes. Dr. Martinez's holoscreen projection flickered to life above the table. The Dreamwalkers have mapped most of the space between dimensions. It's structured like a giant playground. Nana finished. But one built by someone who's never actually played. All straight lines and perfect angles. No wonder your children were trapped. They've never learned how to make proper mess. She pulled out a tablet showing the Thompson twins' latest dream drawings. These spaces here, these aren't just geometric patterns. They're hopscotch courts drawn wrong. And these, she pointed to a series of overlapping circles, jump rope patterns that break the laws of physics. The Vrenthai scientists present vibrated in distress as she began explaining how to turn quantum mathematics into playground games. Sol, who hadn't left Earth since the twins' breakthrough, actually developed a new facet trying to process the implications. Our rescue team will consist of 3 groups, Emily explained, pulling up personnel files. The Dreamwalkers, children who can navigate the spaces. The anchors, their parents who keep them connected to our reality. And the guides. The fun adults, Nana interrupted cheerfully. The ones who never quite grew up. Teachers, artists, musicians, people who remember how to play properly. She demonstrated by blowing a stream of bubbles that, according to the Vrenthai sensors, created temporary quantum tunnels. This is absurd, Coral protested, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. You're suggesting we combat an interdimensional threat with games? No, Nana said firmly, the steel of 40 years of classroom management in her voice. We're suggesting we remind your children how to be children. The hungry things can't hold them if they don't follow the rules. And kids are the best rule breakers in the universe. She held up Mr. Trunks, who somehow managed to look dignified despite being missing an eye and having extra stuffing in his trunk. Every child knows stuffed animals guard against monsters. Your science can't explain it, but it's true. Sometimes the best defense isn't understanding how something works, it's believing that it does. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. They were about to launch the most important rescue mission in galactic history, and their elite team consisted of children in pajamas, parents running on coffee and hope, and a grandmother with a bag full of toys. The worst thing that happened to your children, Nana said softly, wasn't being taken. It was never being taught how to imagine monsters under the bed, because then they'd know how to fight them. The rescue began at bedtime. Across Earth, children settled into their sleeping bags, clutching stuffed animals, and wearing armor made of blanket forts. Parents read stories, not from quantum tablets, but from old paper books that rustled with possibility. Nana Wilson walked among the Dreamwalkers, sprinkling what she called monster-away powder, a mix of glitter and hope, in circles around them. In the space between spaces, Sarah and Michael Thompson led the charge. Their dream forms glowed with the light of 1,000 nightlights, leaving trails of crayon-bright colors through the geometric void. Behind them came the other dreamwalkers, each carrying pieces of Earth's chaos into this realm of perfect order. The Crystal Kids are close, Sarah's voice echoed through the neural link. They're counting infinity again, but some of them are counting backward and adding silly numbers. The Vrenthai children had been stored in mathematical matrices, each one solving endless equations to feed their captors. But thanks to weeks of dream contact with human children, they were learning the art of getting sums deliberately wrong. Look, Michael's excitement rippled through the shared dream space. That one just divided by 0 on purpose. Through the neural monitors, the adults watched in awe as reality itself seemed to hiccup. A Vrenthai child's perfect crystalline patterns suddenly developed rainbow fractures, their equations dissolving into nursery rhymes. The hungry things noticed. Vast geometrical shapes twisted through dimensions, their forms perfect in ways that hurt to perceive. They moved to recapture their escaping prey, but found themselves confronted by something they couldn't comprehend. Imagination weaponized. Now, Nana's voice carried across dimensions, the signal they'd been waiting for. Across the globe, hundreds of children simultaneously blew bubbles. In the space between, those bubbles became quantum escape pods, each one containing a different impossible thing. Dinosaurs dancing ballet, unicorns solving word problems with intentional mistakes, stars that sang off-key. The hungry things recoiled from such beautiful wrongness. They were beings of pure logic, and logic had no defense against a child's ability to believe 6 impossible things before breakfast. They're running. Sarah's joy pulsed through the link. The Crystal Kids remember how to play. Through the neural feed, they watched as Vrenthai children abandoned their mathematical prisons. Their perfect crystalline forms developed swirls and spirals, their quantum harmonics dissolving into something closer to laughter. But the hungry things weren't giving up their prey easily. They surged forward, their geometrical forms weaving nets of pure mathematics to recapture the escaping children. That's when Michael Thompson, 8 years old, and wearing rocket ship pajamas in both real space and dream space, deployed their secret weapon. He pulled out a crayon. Not a real crayon. This was the dream essence of every crayon that had ever drawn a monster, every pencil that had sketched a hero, every marker that had colored outside the lines. With it, he began to draw. He drew doors where doors couldn't exist. He drew slides that went up instead of down. He drew hopscotch courts that broke the laws of physics and jump rope patterns that tangled quantum strings. The hungry things tried to impose order on the chaos, but Sarah was already adding to her brother's work. She drew stars that made sounds and sounds that had colors. She drew time running sideways in space doing cartwheels. And the Vrenthai children, seeing reality become flexible for the first time in their species' history, began to draw too. Their mathematical precision transformed into creative energy, each impossible drawing a declaration of independence from perfect order. The hungry things screamed in frequencies that shattered paradigms. They were losing their grip on this realm of pure logic as it became contaminated with imagination. Through the bubble bridges, Nana's voice guided them. Follow the wrong numbers home. Like a reverse Pied Piper's song, the sound of children's laughter led them back. Through quantum tunnels stabilized by knock-knock jokes, across dimensional bridges built from remembered lullabies, the Vrenthai children followed their human rescuers. They emerged into reality clutching drawings that shouldn't exist, their crystalline forms forever changed by the experience of playing in spaces where math itself learned how to dance. The hungry things, for the first time in their ancient existence, had been defeated by something they couldn't calculate. The pure, chaotic, beautiful imagination of children at play. 3 months after what the Galactic Council formally termed the Quantum Liberation Event, and what the children simply called the Big Playdate, Emily Brooks stood in her office at the newly established Interspecies Childhood Development Center, watching something that would have been impossible before the crisis. Through the quantum-reinforced window, a young Vrenthai child was teaching a human girl how to crystallize bubbles in midair, their forms shimmering with impossible colors. Nearby, Sarah and Michael Thompson were leading a game they'd invented called Random Tag, where the rules changed every 30 seconds based on whatever the players imagined. The room itself was a testament to the new order. One wall covered in children's drawings that doubled as quantum equations, another displaying a monster warning system that used stuffed animals as early alert sensors. Mr. Trunks sat in a place of honor, now officially recognized as the center's chief security officer. Still can't map their game patterns. Emily asked Sol, who had permanently altered his crystalline form to include what he called play facets, irregular surfaces that caught light in unpredictable ways. "We've given up trying," he admitted, his voice carrying harmonics of joy that would have been unthinkable in a Vrenthai before. "Every time we think we understand the rules, they change them. It's beautiful." The Vrenthai children who had returned were different. Their once perfect crystalline forms now featured swirls and spirals, colors that shifted with their moods, and surfaces that could refract light into impossible shapes. More importantly, they had brought back something their species had engineered away generations ago: the ability to play. Nana Wilson, now the center's director of imaginative defense, a title she found endlessly amusing, walked in carrying her latest project, a handbook titled Quantum Playground Safety, a guide to protected chaos. "The council finally approved it," she announced, dropping the book on Emily's desk. "Every school in Vrenthai space will now be required to maintain a minimum level of imaginative disorder." Can you believe it? Emily could. She'd seen the data. Vrenthai children who maintained regular play protocols were virtually immune to the hungry thing's influence. More surprisingly, they were developing new forms of quantum mathematics based on the fluid logic of games rather than rigid equations. "Ambassador Coral's latest report just came in," Emily said, pulling up a holographic display. "The hungry things haven't been detected in any monitored space for weeks. Apparently, they find the new quantum fluctuations distasteful. Hard to eat what you can't predict." Nana nodded sagely, watching as a group of children outside invented a new game involving quantum tunnels and hopscotch. The Thompson twins had become minor celebrities in both human and Vrenthai space. Their dream-walking abilities had evolved into something new. They could now perceive the spaces between spaces while awake, helping to establish safe play zones where imagination and physics could mingle freely. A commotion outside drew their attention. One of the Vrenthai children had just discovered they could make their crystalline form produce rainbow bubbles. The resulting celebration involved 3 different species, 2 parallel dimensions, and what appeared to be a spontaneously invented victory dance. "We were wrong, you know," Sol said softly, his form reflecting the children's joy in fractal patterns. "We thought advancing meant moving away from chaos, engineering out everything that couldn't be calculated. We nearly engineered out our children's ability to survive." Emily watched as Sarah Thompson taught a young Vrenthai how to draw stars that made music. "Sometimes the best defense isn't understanding how something works." She quoted Nana's words from that crucial council meeting. "It's believing that it does." In the years that followed, the Galactic Council would establish new protocols for measuring civilization advancement. Alongside technological achievements and scientific understanding, they now evaluated a species' imaginative resilience index, their ability to maintain creative chaos in the face of rigid order. The hungry things never returned to known space. Perhaps they couldn't bear the taste of worlds where physics had learned to play, where mathematics could laugh, and where children of all species were taught the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the most powerful thing in the universe isn't understanding the rules. It's knowing when to break them. In the center's playground, beneath a sky where stars now danced to children's songs, the next generation of dreamwalkers invented new games, drew new realities, and kept the universe safe. one impossible thing at a time.